Jacksonville, a child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks and their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history in this land of flowers.
March the 9th from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network, the week that was. And it is March the 9th, 2019. Just looking at my calendar here. Nonetheless, it was an eventful week, I suppose one could say. Much to do about nothing, a waste of congressional time and the investigation. I guess you'd say high-tech, low-tech probably, because a bunch of low type of bottom feeders were involved of Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar, of course, being a freshman type, first-year legislator from the upper Midwest state of Minnesota. She has spoken out against genocide, war crimes in Palestine, that is in the Mideast, and the people perpetrating those crimes are the Israeli Defense Forces, settlers, etc., fresh arrived, many of them from New York. It is a situation there where you have a wall to wall off communities, a land grab there, one of the oldest things in existence, where you have these land grab type operations. It's sort of like when the Sooner Territory out in Elizabeth Warren's home state of Oklahoma. They called it Oklahoma Territory at the time, eventually turned into a state, and that just shows what you can do when you get land, which brings resources, in that case oil. In the case of the Zionist state, we're not sure what it is there, but it is land, it is water, and it has never been discussed here in the 50 continuous United States as it is today. There is an awareness over the world, in most of the world, and this is what the veteran congressman Mr. Claiborne of South Carolina was talking about, that the historic basis for those land claims in the Mideast basically based upon a colonial claim. It was with Britain, which doesn't stand up at all. Those land claims are the same thing that kicked off the conflict in Iraq. At the time, the president, Saddam Hussein, was told by an American ambassador, an official of State Department, that Kuwait, of course, being part of Iraq historically, and he could just take it back, and he did. He moved troops in there. They took it back, the territory there, the fiefdom, let's say. of and that was Kuwait. That was the end of that story. The U.S. got together a coalition primarily of colonial powers. They threw a few little small outlets in just to have something there, and they went in and invaded the country and drove almost to Baghdad. That was under the first President Bush, and withdrew because mission accomplished. And then in the 2000s, 2001, 2002, after the election had been stolen from Howard Gore of Tennessee, and G.W. Bush, the son of the first President Bush, was the president at the time, they had a second Iraqi war, and they were able to, that time, once again, bomb the country, invade the country, and murder President Saddam Hussein, and install a puppet government who is, various renditions of it are still there. They have a more hold on the government, but is not, the governing out of Baghdad is not as tenuous as the other government in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, the government there has Kabul and a few other hectares of land, and that's just about it. But a long serving battlefield, the U.S. has put billions of dollars into that battlefield and accomplished absolutely zero. And that is one of the problems with Wilsonian foreign policy. That is where Ilhan Omar comes in. She's talking about it. She doesn't mention Wilsonian foreign policy, but she did mention linkage between two administrations, the administration of Barack Obama and the administration of DJ Trump. Barack Obama used drones to bomb people. He was known for that. And also at the borders, they detained people there and separated families. Wasn't as much said about it at that time because that was not a major piece of Barack Obama's legislative agenda. Was that the wall was a dangerous place, which it is not. The present conditions along the borders, particularly in Texas, California, Arizona, have been there forever. And what you're getting today, the migration that's coming in, is coming primarily from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and those places. And the reason they are coming is these various puppets, governments that's been installed there by the U.S. has failed their people. And now gangsters rule there in El Salvador, in Guatemala, and people are leaving because they fear for their lives. It's that simple. But in this backdrop, we had the back to the enormous waste of time, is to single out Ilhan Omar as a poster woman for hate. When you have an administration that is a nationalist administration, they call America First. DJ Trump was in Alabama, maybe he was singing Dixie, who knows, and signing Bibles. That tells you all. It's a backward state of affairs. And this doesn't bring any political capital to these various people. But what it did do, as one commentator said, that was had been around a very, very long time, a Republican commentator here, that he was a Democratic commentator, that the House Democrats under Pelosi folded up to these Zionists. It's just that simple. But they couldn't fold up all the way because of the good work of Representative Clyburn, who went out and explained to the people Representative Omar's point of view, which is something of a millennium. She's in her 30s, but she has been a refugee. She came from Somalia on to Kenya. She was there for 4 years, and then she was educated here, and she is well educated, well versed, and well read. Many of the people in the House are not well read, And many of the commentators that you hear, talking heads, they are not well read. And some are just misread. They're invested in a foreign policy that has been bankrupt for over 50 years. And now it's put in check. You go to a modern day crisis they've created Venezuela. That the Russian Republic, very, very large republic that has nuclear weapons, it's completely modernized, and the Chinese under Xi Jinping, I usually pronounce his name right, but anyway, nonetheless, President Xi Jinping. Anyway, the president of China, and their massive military, and the Indian government, and in other words, most of the world, contrary to what you read in the newspapers, support the government there under Nicolas Maduro. Anyway, we'll call him Maduro. I'd have to look at it. I don't have it in front of me here. But nonetheless, what you get here is a very, very narrow view of things, and that is a setup in the House. And so when Representative Omar called it out, imagine groups of people organized to support a government, a sovereign government. You can use the word foreign government if you wish. It's a sovereign government. Israel is a sovereign government, no doubt about it. And to lobby on that behalf, propagandize. Now, the PAC she talked about does not, and I repeat that, does not give money directly to the Zionists. However, though, they are associated with people that do, and members of it also do it individually. That in itself is just sheer old politics. Period. But what happened this past week, was beyond politics. They took it to a hate-filled platform. I was reading some lady there said that she should be stripped of the committees. Another representative out of Texas, who was a dummy, said that effectively the House should never interfere in the Israeli position, the Zionist position. Now that is just lunacy. It is the job of the Foreign Relations Committee in the House to question everything, where aid is given, where support is given, period. But the greater fear here is not about Representative Omar, who's only been there for a few months, or Shaida out of the Motor City, or Representative Cortez. It is that the shift of history is shifting on them. If you look around the world, the Zionists have very few so-called allies, friends, what do you want to call them, period. But to bundle this up with an anti-Semitic attack, and one person on Facebook was saying it's a racist attack, well, whatever. But that's a subjective opinion. With Zionism by the UN General Assembly has been labeled racism, and most of the world voted for it. The U.S. did not. But the whole point there is that they're working on thin ice, as LBJ would say. They're literally on ice in the middle of August in Texas. So I guess it would have to be artificial ice. But this is the challenge that they face. But this time, so we'll go to Elizabeth Warren here first. She is addressing monopolies. She's not the first representative to do that, or the only one, I should say, that is running for president. Amy Klobuchar talked about monopolies, but Elizabeth Warren wants to break up Amazon, Facebook, and Google. And she held a rally of all places in part of the district that in Queens that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has. It's called Long Island City. She had about 300 people there, which is good for her. She said, I don't want a government that is here to work for giant tech companies. I want a government that's here to work for the people. So she's moving about the country in the event, in an event held not far from where Amazon was going to set their business up, but they beat it. Giants are not allowed to buy out the competition. The competition needs the opportunity to thrive and to grow. And this is one thing that happens if you take a freshman economics course. It usually would be micro. It would be micro. In fact, to any of the economists, including the late right-wing economist Milton Friedman, or any of them, you can choose which one you want. The most concerning, back to old Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations, the problem has always been monopolies. So again, this is just basic orthodox economics. You have to break up monopolies. This would, for example, forbid Amazon from selling on its Amazon marketplace platform. Warren also proposed legislation that would require the Googles and Amazons that offer online marketplace or exchanges to refrain from competing on their own platforms. In other words, have their cake and eat it too. So this is one of the things out here that she's talking about that is a present day situation. Let's go to Uncle Carl Robe. We always have Uncle Carl here. Won't spend any time on Representative Clyburn because we talked about him. And nonetheless, Uncle Carl is writing in the Wall Street Journal, as he usually does, on the 7th of March, 2 days ago, the Democratic primary from hell. Well, Uncle Carl in his same column used the words, the Republican primary candidates that was in 2016 was the best crop they'd ever had. And they fell like dominoes, boom, 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 boom. And DJ Trump was blowing the air on them. And they all, as LBJ would say, folded up like a $2 suitcase in the rain. But return to the present crop. He said, in addition to Washington State's Jay Inslee, he's the environmental man. John Hickenlooper, he used to be a governor in Colorado. He's known as the Brewmaster. Though Hillary Clinton, Michael Bloomberg, and at least we forget Oregon Senator Merkley this week demurred. I thought he was actually going to run. The Democratic field is likely to be even larger than the GOP 17-person field in 2016. Former Vice President Joe Lunchbox Biden. This is written Sherrod Brown of Ohio. He's beat it. I don't know anything about Steve Bullard or Terry McAfee out of Virginia. And the Texas Senate under loser. And he evidently has this thing with Beto O'Rourke and several other congressional types who you've never heard of and could still jump into the race. Well, anyone can jump in the race. I guess Uncle Carl could. The resulting battle expect the unexpected. The Democrats' problem go far beyond the number of candidates to change the electoral calendar, and rules have introduced further complications. For one thing, the first Democratic debate is this June, while the first Republican debate in 2015 was in August. The problem is this whole primary scam is too long. Even in August, you have an August August debate, and you didn't have the Iowa caucus until February. Makes no sense. Planning for as many as 20 candidates, Democratic National Committee. Perez says the party won't follow the GOP in having what he calls an adult. This is a tiered debate based on the polling. The ones that have certain polling numbers would be in one, and those that are low in the polls would be in the separate debate, which he calls the kiddie debate. Well, here we don't know. We'll see if Perez has the secret sauce. Otherwise, 20 podiums on the stage may prove to be tough to manage. At a minimum, some candidates will try to stand out by making harsh attacks on fellow Democrats, be over the top assaults on DJ Trump, and see radical proposals to please the party's hardline left base. Expect a few 20 hopefuls trifecta. Well, you never know. Major candidates will survive unless they commit mega gaps. Well, we won't have time to because there'll be too many people talking. But the televised political wrestling matches could make or break lesser lights. These candidates will either get a boost in a name identification and fundraising from a standout performance, or see hopes and money dwindle as they fade into the crowd. Well, some will be fading into the sunset. Then the first loaded candidate selection, twice as many Democratic delegates could be chosen in this cycle. The first month of the primary, as in 2016. This year the Democrats scramble start in Iowa on the 1st of February. Over the following months, 15 states and American Samoa, that doesn't even have caucuses of primaries, selecting 1,024 delegates the following month. That'll be in March. Nearly a quarter of the Democratic convention there. The first month contest in 2020 fall between contests fall between February the 3rd and March the 3rd. Will select 1,597 delegates. That's 42.4% of the total. For the increased, I think California, 495 delegates there. North Carolina has 122 delegates, which have moved their primaries up from June and mid-March respectively. The first month's elected delegates count will grow since Georgia is 105, Colorado it's 67, have yet to set their primary dates. They could all be in March also, or in April, who knows. They want to separate out a little because if everybody is in March, some of the small states, particularly like Colorado, would be left out of the TV viewers. They, if they choose March 1st, 2020, nearly half the delegates would be selected in the primaries opening 29 days. More than 73% would be chosen by April Fool's Day. I guess Carl will be celebrating his birthday. This could go a couple of different ways. Early victories could set up one candidate to run the table. Our votes is in California, Commonwealth, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Texas on March the 3rd could guarantee Senator Harris, Senator Warren, and Amy Klobuchar and O'Rourke, respectively, the big slag of home delegates that cement them as long-term players set apart from the rest. But if any of those four fail to meet expectations at home, expect a downward spiral. Kamala Harris is going to do well in California. It's we'll see how Elizabeth Warren does there, and Amy Klobuchar in California. She'll do well in Minnesota. And in Texas, very difficult to say there. I noticed he left out Bernie Sanders, the man that's leading now. Most likely, delegates, front runners will quickly consolidate the Democratic field around 4 or 5 candidates. Probably no doubt about that, increasing the chances that no one will win on the first ballot of the convention. This is because the Democrats award delegates proportionally to any candidate who gets 15% of the vote in the state, limiting runaway victories. The Republicans are less proportional. Florida Senator Marco Vegas Rubio received 17.7% in Texas, but only 3 of the delegates. Texas has, for the Republicans, 155 delegates. If no Democrat establishes dominance before March the 3rd, watch out. Proportionality, offsprings, and fractured field could force the Democratic convention to multiple ballots. Well, that in itself would be very interesting, particularly if you have a candidate like Joe Lunchbox of Biden and the Democratic machine. But that would further fracturize the party. This year we're looking at it a little bit differently than we have in the past as far as our modeling. We're not modeling Florida. We will not model Florida unless we change our mind for the general election in 2020. So thus the whole situation there, you'll have very, very quick primaries by June. I'm not sure who will be there. You probably will have a nominee by June, or at least a front runner running into July and August, the conventions, and then of course after the conventions the presidential race starts off. But as we see the landscape now, this is for the Democrats. We see the Democrats improving their voting possibilities in places like Texas and in North Carolina and Georgia. Those three states are states that they need to organize, particularly progressives, to organize in. The others really doesn't matter. Now you have a few of these candidates left that are trying to be the traditional candidates. Now what will happen if Joe Lunchbox to Biden comes in? The so-called middle-of-the-road candidates, you're starting them to fade. Gillibrand, I can think of her now as one that will probably disappear very, very quickly. And some of the other less known. What will happen, say, to Twitter King Booker, Kamala Harris? Those candidates, will Twitter King and Harris sort of match each other out? Well, that'll be to be seen. South Carolina will be action there. That is a state that the Democratic Party is followers of O.J. Simpson. That's where Mr. Clyburn comes from. We don't know who he will support or who he will not support in that range. And where Bernie plays in there, Bernie has been campaigning well in those areas. There was something, I believe it was a Politico, one of them was talking about so many, maybe actually Washington Post, about Bernie and having some rallies, not as many as before. Well, people know who Bernie is. This was in Iowa, and he hasn't put organization into Iowa yet. He doesn't need to, because his name is known well in Iowa, because he's ran there before, and he had an organization. It's a little different from him. Elizabeth Warren, not as well. Twitter King Booker has been in and out of there. In Iowa, it's easy to recognize Twitter King Booker or Kamala Harris, but the problem is they're all kind of bunched up there. Let me just look at some quick polling here. Oh, Roy Moore. I don't want to forget Roy Moore. Roy Moore is thinking of running again in 2020. That'll be against Jones. There's one other Republican that's already announced there in Alabama. And there's also a story in the Post. I can just do it from memory. Howard Schwartz, old Howard Schwartz, otherwise known as the coffee shop Schwartz, he had at one time owned the Supersonic basketball team, which is now in the Thunder in Oklahoma City. He lost control. Basically, the franchise is forced to sell it. Never went over correctly there. He couldn't do magic with a sports team. Got into some loud shouting matches with some of the players. Not something for an owner to do in the NBA. Thus the team left, and he's still in Seattle. Anyway, that is part of that story. So let me just quickly go here to Real Clear Politics, and hopefully we have the polls up here. We'll see. We have any? Okay, we have Friday. This is the Hill. The Hill is using. The Hill, incidentally, is a center-right news outlet. They're using. They have DJ Trump at 45, disapproval at 55, and we go to Wednesday. It's the Mama poll at 44 for DJ Trump. YouGov, which is an internet poll. Had him at also at 45. The Morning Consult, that is Politico's poll at 41, and the Reuters poll, which we'll look at here in a minute, at 39. That's the ESOS poll. Used to be Reuters there. So that was where they stood in. And for some of the candidates here, the Morning Consult, that's a weekly poll, had Biden at 31. He's pretty much been around in the higher double digits. Bernie Sanders at 27. Kamala Harris at 11. Elizabeth Warren, she's been in the single digits at 7. And then Twitter King Booker at 4. And Beto O'Rourke at 6. Amy Klobuchar at 3. Hickenlooper at 1. And the rest of these characters are at 1 with Castro, etc. going there. We just dive a little bit into this poll. This is the Morning Consult, the core data here. Hopefully we can get into it a little bit. Well, we had it where we could get into it. If not, we'll have to use it for Monday morning. Uh-oh. We're getting into it. We just need to enlarge it, kind of like a presentation here. Nonetheless, it's 3,269 people were in the poll, Americans they say, and 1,305 were Democrats, 1,058 were Republicans, and 512 independents. Okay, this is the first screen. Incident the poll was taken from the 27th of February to the 5th of March. And as far as the credibility thing, it's 2 for everyone. 3.1 for Democrats, 3.3 for Republicans, and 4.9 credibility interval, they call it. Oh. Now, we start looking at right track, wrong track. 58% of adults said the country's on the wrong track. That's usually what you get. And that's 84% of Democrats and 29% of the Republicans and 62% of the independents, something we look at. And if we look at issues here, unemployment, lack of jobs, the economy generally, we just do that. 11% have an interest in that. That's 11% of the Democrats, 10% of the Republican, independents, 15%. Wars and conflicts, 2% of the total, way down there. Foreign policy as usual. Terrorism, the total there is 6%, 4% Democrats, 10% Republicans, 5% independents. Healthcare, 18%, 25% of Democrats, 14% of the Republicans, 16% of the independents. Energy issues, just 1%. Mortality, 9% of the total, 8% of Democrats, 12% of the Republicans. Education, 5% the Democrats, 3% of Republicans, and 6% of the independents. Crime, not very high on the list, 6% total, 5% of the Democrats, and 6% and 6% of the Republicans. The environment, only 6% there, 10% of the Democrats, not much for Mr. Inslee there, 2% of the Republicans and 6% of the independents. And don't know got 4%, etc. All right, let's move on here. So if you look at where things basically stand, unemployment is down. Healthcare is up. This in 2019. Anyway, I think we... Now, the approval rating, the approval vote, DJ Trump, 23% approved, 5% of Democrats, 52% of Republicans, 15% of the independents. Somewhat approved, 14%, 4% of the Democrats, I don't know where they are, and 27% of Republicans, 15% of the independents. Leans toward approval, 2% of the total, and somewhat disapproved at 12% of the total, and 42% strongly disapproved there. 13% of Democrats, 74% strongly disapprove, and it's 8 and 8 with the Republicans. So we get a total here. His approval is at 39. That's DJ Trump. 9% of the Democrats and 82% of the Republicans, they approve of him, and 33% of the independents, something we look at very closely there. Disapproval is at 56%, that's 89% of the Democrats, 17% of the Republicans, and this is a very high figure here, 58% of the independents. And we already talked about the economy. Congressional approval rating is always very, very low. The total approval rating here is 47%. 52% of Democrats approve, 57% of the Republicans. And 32% of the independents. Do you approve or disapprove the way Congress as a whole is handling the job? 25% approve, 64% disapprove. Just give it the totals here. Identity here, 15% strong Democrat, 8% moderate Democrats, 6% leaners, 5% will leaners, the Republicans, 15% moderates, strong Republicans, 15, independents, 16, and none of the above is 6% and 4%. Party ID, 13%, Republicans, 29%. Party ID with leaners, Democrats at 39%, Republicans 34%, independents at 16%. And a base and credibility level here, I won't get into that one, but they did put it here. And the credibility intervals, we talked about it. That's usually the thing. Anyway, ranks, this is ESOP, ranks third in global research industry with strongest presence in 87 countries. It employs more than 16,000 people, founded in France in 1975. They built a solid media group, an advertising group, etc. And that is who they are, and they also are Reuters. So anyway, that is the end of that story right there. And let me see, get them and we'll do the sports. Make sure we didn't lose anyone here. No, we got everybody. Oh, Jerry Merriman, we have to appreciate him. He died. He was 86 years old. He's a man that, he's one of the inventors of the handheld calculator. Remember that one? He died in a Dallas hospital. The heart and kidney failure. That's what his stepdaughter said. He'd been hospitalized a very long time, since late December, so he'd been in the hospital a very, very long time. Merriman was one of the three men credited with inventing the handheld calculator while working at Texas Instruments. The team was led by Jack Kilby, who made the way for today's computers and inventors, and the inventor of the integrated circuit, who won the Nobel Prize. A prototype built by the team also included James Van Tassel, is at the Smithsonian Institute, and there was I also heard it on CBC there. He was born in 1932. By the age of 11, he was repairing radios in his hometown of Herney, Texas, wherever Herney, Texas is. He attended Texas A&M University and worked at the University Department of Oceanography. Oh, interesting. In meteorology. Before long, he was measuring the force of hurricane winds on platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. He started in 1963 at TI, that's Texas Instruments, retired in 1994. So a brilliant engineer was he. Okay. Let's do the sports now. Oh, yeah, well, finish on time. Amazing. Nonetheless, we'll start out with Major League Baseball spring training, that is. The Sox and Orioles are 4-2. The Rays and Twins, 5-5 tie there. The Blue Jays and Pirates are shut out, 11-zip. The Nationals and Cardinals, the Cardinals pull that one out, 3-2. The Pirates and Blue Jays 5-2. The Marlins and Mets, easily the Marlins 10-3 there. The Diamondbacks and Brewers 6-3. The Reds and Royals 8-3. There, Royals. The Padres and Athletics 6-1. The White Sox and Angels, White Sox 15-8. The Rangers and Rockies 11-10. High scoring game there. The Phillies and Atlanta 5-4 Atlanta. The Cards and Astros, Cards 6-3. One of the few places probably the Cards are going to beat the Astros is spring training. The Tigers and Yankees, Tigers 6-5. The Giants and Cleveland, the Giants shut them out 2-0. The Cubbies and Mariners, Cubbies 9-3. And finally the Royals and Dodgers split scored evidently here. 7-4 was the score there. And we're going to have to go back here and get in the NBA scores. All right. The Wizards and Hornets 112-111. The Mavericks and Magic, the Magic 111-102. The Cavaliers and Heat, the Heat was 126-110. The Pistons and Bulls, the Pistons 112-104, and they were in Chicago. The 76ers and Rockets, it was the Rockets 107-91. The Jazz and Grizzlies, Grizzlies 114-104, 10-point game. The Raptors and Pelicans in the Big Easy after Mardi Gras. And incidentally, Mardi Gras was last week also. And happy International Women's Day. It was yesterday. 127-104. The Nuggets and Warriors. It was the Warriors 122-104. And finally, the team that Swartz sold, the Thunder. And the Clippers in Los Angeles. The Clippers 118-110. So I guess we'll do the National Hockey League while we're in this area here. The Wild and Panthers. It was the Panthers 6-2. The Devils and Capitals. Capitals shut out the Devil 3-0. The Jets of Winnipeg and the Hurricanes. It was Jets 8-1. And finally, the Canadiens and Ducks. It was the Ducks 8-2. To women's basketball, University of Miami and Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech 84-70. Bowling Green and Buffalo. 84 for Buffalo and 73 for Bowling Green. And finally, Minnesota and Maryland. It was Maryland 69-60. Make sure we get the right. That was on Friday. The 8th. Okay, that is on the men's side. Did we say men's? Hopefully we said men's. It is men's. Now to the women. Clemson and Louisville. That was Louisville 75-67. North Carolina and Notre Dame. It was Notre Dame in a runaway 95-77. Tennessee and Mississippi State. Mississippi State 83-68. Arizona and Oregon. The Ducks. It was the Ducks 77-63. California and Stanford, a neighborhood rivalry there. Stanford 72-54. Michigan State and Maryland. Maryland 71-55. Florida State and North Carolina was North Carolina 69-62. Indiana and Iowa. Iowa 70-61 there. Washington and Oregon State, a 1-point game. University of Washington 68-67. It was Arkansas and South Carolina. It was Arkansas 95-89, and Missouri and Kentucky in overtime 2-pointer. Missouri pulled it out 70-68. Auburn and Texas A&M. Mr. Merriman's old school 64-62. And Syracuse and the University of Miami. It was Syracuse 92-85. And finally, Arizona State and UCLA. UCLA 73-69. That will do it for sports over this weekend. And we'll return on the political side with the Monday morning quarterback. We'll probably have some Sunday program. We definitely will have, we've been saying this for over a month, the open source report. And numbers, man, the numbers dropping. All of the so-called analysts that do that, we don't do that at Crash Analytics. In other words, we don't tell you there's going to be 160,000 jobs created or what have you. But nonetheless, they did have it somewhere around there, and it was 20,000 jobs out. Now, remember, because of the closure of the government, some of these numbers are going to be revised down at the Bureau of Statistics released. So we're out there, but we'll look at some other evidence here and also a report on the worldwide slowdown and what has happened. That'll be all on Numbers Man, so stay tuned for that. Have a good weekend, everyone. Hopefully winter has not gotten you too badly there, and spring will be in a few days. St. Patty's Day, St. Patty's weekend will be next week. We'll have, of course, a special St. Patty's Day show, and if my memory is correct, it will be on a Sunday. Good day.